one. Om Tavagatamritam Tapta Jivanam Kavibhirititam Kalmashapaham Shavanamangalam Shrivadatatam Bhuvigananti Puriyaj. Your words are like nectar, bring life to squirt souls. They are praised by poets and remove all sin. They are auspicious to hear, wonderful and exalted. Those who spread these words throughout the world are truly giving souls. Welcome, everyone, to our class on the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. We're on chapter 20, Rules for Householders and Monks, Sunday, March 9th, 1884, and page 404. Sri Ramakrishna is speaking to Manilal and others, one of the senior devotees who comes quite often. And of course, M is always there. And Sri Ramakrishna then explained the sacred word Om and the true knowledge of Brahman and the state of mind after the attainment of Brahmajnana, master. The sound Om is Brahman. The rishis and sages practiced austerity to realize that sound Brahman. After attaining perfection, one hears the sound of this eternal word rising spontaneously from the navel. Now, this, of course, is a huge topic. You'd spend several sessions on the meaning of the word Om. We know at least that Om is not considered to be a word, like an ordinary word that has some object that it refers to, or some idea, or some emotion, or some thought, something like that. The sound itself represents Brahman. And we have this idea of this Shabda Brahman or Nada Brahman, that this is somehow almost a kind of ethereal vibration that's responsible for the creation of the universe, something like that. So it's a curious word. We have other types of bij mantras that also are more sounds than words, and they go along with something, but nothing as universal as this Om. And of course, we have the different theories that there's Ma will stand for the three states of consciousness, and we have a whole Mandukya Upanishad and other things. So there are those who they worship Brahman as Om. We had it earlier, I think it was earlier, conversation between Sri Ramakrishna and one sadhu, and he was asking him about his meditation. He meditates on Om, and he said, but it's not enough just to meditate on Om. There has to be something represented by Om. And he says Om itself is represented by Om, or Brahman itself, something like that. So Sri Ramakrishna, he kind of liked that answer. Yeah. So it's not a typical kind of word. It's called anahata because every other sound or every other word is caused by a vibration, by something striking something. If you hit something, it makes a sound. When we speak, the vocal cords have to vibrate. Something is striking them to make a sound. This is an unstruck sound because it's before everything else. There's nothing to strike against in order to cause this sound. It's the ultimate cause of everything. This is one theory, one type of explanation for so-called, a creation type of theory. And Sri Ramakrishna had that experience, some others, that Swami Turiyananda, that somehow they sometimes call it the music of the spheres. Somehow they can reach a stage in their spiritual practice where they hear this going on, this eternal Om. We can't give a very good scientific explanation, but it's something that the mystics experience. Then he goes on. What will you gain? Some sages ask, by merely hearing this sound. So these the different schools of thought, of course, that we have to know what's represented. We have to know some of the uh, depth of understanding that goes into this concept of Om if we want to really appreciate it. What will you gain? Some sages ask, by merely hearing this sound. You hear the roar of the ocean from a distance. By following the roar, you can reach the ocean. As long as there is the roar, there must also be the ocean. By following the trail of Om, you attain Brahman, of which the word is the symbol. So it's a sound symbol. It's not like any other symbol. Of course, we have Omkara. We have it written out as a syllable. That's also a symbol. We have it right here. So that's, but the sound itself stands for it, or represents it. It's a sound representative for Brahman. So it's a different type of concept. So you attain Brahman, of which the word is the symbol. That Brahman has been described by the Vedas as the ultimate goal. Now, the one thing about this Om is that it's impersonal. This will be for the Jnanis, and this will be the old Vedic or Vedanta Upanishadic period when there wasn't much of a bhakti yoga or anything. That Brahman was thought of as pure consciousness, and somehow this consciousness, pure consciousness, can create some type of vibration or something that can create the world. There's a whole Kashmiri Shaiva school that is based on this idea of the spanda, and this is a little vibration that will start everything going. So any of this.
Om cannot be objectified.
Om cannot be objectified. Of course, when we say Om, we're objectifying it, because then that Om is a sound that's actually made by my vocal cords and everything. But if we're talking about what it stands for, that Brahman itself can never be objectified. But as a symbol is an object. So in that sense, yeah, it's some tangible symbol, not that we see it, right, but we hear it. It's a sound. But then, as I say, we have the written symbol of it also. So that Brahman has been described by the Vedas as the ultimate goal. But such vision is not possible as long as you are conscious of your ego. A man realizes Brahman only when he feels neither I nor you, neither one nor many. So this is the highest path of Jnana Yoga, where this if we have a sense of I, it means that we have erroneously identified ourselves with the non-self, which is the definition of ajnana, of avidya. The definition of avidya, of this ignorance or lack of realization, is that we falsely identify with that which is external to us, all of the coverings, body, mind, and all of that, and ego sense. Ego sense. If our ego sense is united with this Brahman, that's a different story. Then we won't go around saying, oh, I did this, I did that, and everything. It's a different type of an I. But as long as one is conscious of one's ego, that means that we're in a state of false identification. So this in Vedanta, the path of Jnana Yoga, this is the main problem, that we identify with the superficial coverings. And spiritual practice means disidentifying, peeling off these coverings to get to our real nature. And that real nature is beyond this ego or this empirical ego. This ego is not any fixed thing. Ego simply means, what is our image of ourselves? How do we view ourselves? How do we identify ourselves? So this is why Thakur likes to talk in terms of this scale. Either it's very green or it's very ripe, that it's constantly changing. We're forging a new type of identity by having a relationship with God. So it's how we look upon ourselves. For the jnani, trying to realize that I am that, I'm one with that ultimate reality. But this empirical ego, this unripe ego, this heavy ego, this ego that gets bruised easily, that's filled with pride, or has a poor self-image, uh, that type of ego, which is fully invested in personality and in our past and in our culture, all of that, uh, that can't be there if we want to have the highest type of realization, because the highest type of realization is not simply Brahman, but the oneness of the self in Brahman for Jnana Yoga. So if we say that I understand the real nature of Brahman, but I feel identified with this individuality, it's a contradiction. We can only understand Brahman as our very own self if we want to have the highest knowledge. Think of the sun and 10 jars filled with water, one of Sri Ramakrishna's favorite illustrations. We get this over and over again in the gospel. The sun is reflected in each jar. At first, you see one real sun and 10 reflected ones. If you break 9 of the jars, there will remain only the real sun and one reflection. Each jar represents a jiva. Now, other times, Sri Ramakrishna will be a little more explicit that the jar itself is this physical body, and the water inside of the jar will be the subtle body or mind. So this is that composite, and the reflected sun resting on the surface of the water, all of that as a package together will be the jiva. So the jiva is the consciousness reflected in this body-mind complex, something like that. Each jar represents a jiva. Each one is an individual soul. We can put it that way. Following the reflection, one can find the real sun. Now, this is another one of Thakur's teachings, that if we want to know the real nature of Brahman, Brahman is, we can say, is the source of everything, the ground of the universe, that we should look outside of ourselves. But he says, no, that we understand Brahman as reflected within the heart or mind. So we find the divine presence as our very own self by turning within. Following the reflection, one can find the real sun. Through the individual soul, one can reach the supreme soul. Through spiritual discipline, the individual soul can get a vision of the supreme soul. What remains when the last jar is broken cannot be described. This is an interesting illustration, because it's we can take it in a couple of different ways. One is that it's kind of a Sankhya or yoga model, in that the body and mind are considered to be something real and something separate from the sun, and the mind is kind of an instrument, it's insentient, so it can catch the reflection of the sun. And Sri Ramakrishna says that this is an illustration that is found that he says according to the Puranas. Now we know that this is a code word for him, that either according to Vedanta or according to Puranas. According to Vedanta means this is according to non-dualistic philosophy, Advaita Vedanta. According to Puranas, it means according to a dualistic or devotional attitude or point of view. Now, the Advaitins constantly use this illustration because they don't take it that as being the main point being made here, that you have to have a separate mind and body and everything in order to catch the reflection of the sun. That's the secondary thing, and that for them, the real point is how can one thing manifests as many things without changing itself. If somebody says, how is it possible? They can say, well, look at the sun. If it's reflected in 10 of these containers of water, it's not broken into 10 different pieces. It's the same sun. If it's in 1,000, the sun is not decreased by the number of reflections that it's in. It remains unchanged completely. So they take this as being an illustration of how Brahman is unaffected by any of these changes. Now, we can say that why not combine these theories? If the sun passes through a prism, then it manifests as this whole various universe, and then it can reflect in all of that, and we see that by the light of the sun. We can do that. The Advaitin is not particularly concerned with explaining where the jar and the water comes from with this illustration. The main point is how can this Brahman appear as many without undergoing any change itself? If we take it a different way, that this Brahman is entered into each and every being, then is it less by each time it enters? Is it a little bit less? Is there a portion of it in each and every one of us? No, the full sun is reflected. This is the point. Each one will be a perfectly round sun. Yeah. But Thakur always makes the point that once this jar is broken, the water is not there. That's the same as the salt doll being at the bottom of the ocean, that there's no one there to say what is the real nature of the Brahman. Then the sun alone exists. But we are that. The tricky part. We don't disappear then. And we are that sun. Anyhow, this is a very helpful illustration. Now, I want to make one other point that helpful to a certain point. That all of these illustrations, we may have a very clear understanding of how this works with pots and with water and with the sun and the reflected sun. But if we start to say that, well, now we're really talking about consciousness, not sunlight. We can all know what it's like for the sun to be reflected even in a puddle. We see the sun reflected there. That is easy. What does it mean for consciousness, which is completely immaterial? There's nothing to see, to be reflected in mind, which we know nothing about. And how is this mind in this container of the body? If we analyze these analogies, then we come to the conclusion that they're helpful to a certain extent, and that we can fool ourselves into thinking we understand the nature of Brahman in the universe only because we understand these analogies. Right? Take the snake and the rope. I understand very well that we can't ask this question, that where did the snake come from? How did it come into being? When did it come into being? That we can't answer these questions because there's no real snake, there's only a rope. But how does that help me with the Brahman? So Sri Ramakrishna says that these ultimate truths go beyond these illustrations. We can't put it into words. They're helpful to a certain extent. There's no question that they're helpful because we have nothing else to rely on. These analogies are the best type of help, but really when we analyze them very carefully, we understand that we can have perfect understanding of the analogy without being able to transpose it to these questions of individual self, supreme self, the Brahman, and everything. Yeah. So, what does it mean for consciousness? It's not a thing, immaterial. Thakur even says in one place, but remember, the light of the sun is a material light. It's got something. It actually has waves and things that can bounce off of something and everything. How does consciousness do that with mind and body and everything? So we have to understand how helpful these analogies are, but avoid the conclusion that because we understand the analogy, we understand the nature of Brahman. That's that is a completely different level of understanding that comes from realization and from spiritual practice. The jiva at first remains in the state of ignorance, he is not conscious of God, but of the multiplicity. So this is all of us. This is all of us. We don't see this in Brahman. We know that we're conscious beings. That's about as much as we can say. But we live in this world of multiplicity. We take it for granted. Everyone is an individual. It's very hard for anybody to say that they don't believe in individuals. They don't believe what their eyes are telling them. This is all an illusion. Generally, they're mad people. Insane asylum. The jiva at first remains in a state of ignorance. He is not conscious of God, but of the multiplicity. He sees many things around him. When attaining knowledge, he becomes conscious that God dwells in all beings. Now, look at the language that Thakur uses. Sometimes he'll say he becomes conscious that God dwells in all beings. Other times that God has become all this. Now, they're not contradictory. We can accept both, and we can accept the fact that we may have a different type of realization. Sometimes Thakur talks about different levels, that those who think of God as up there, and that those who see God dwelling within everything, and the highest, those who see that God has become everything. Now, God has become everything, God can still dwell within everything. If we take the container and the water to all be manifestation of Brahman, we can still say that that sun is reflected in that water. No contradiction there. But one thing I like about this analogy, Pratibimbavad it's called, of the reflected sun, is that we can accept the relative reality of this world and still be an Advaitin, and still say that this individual jiva has no ultimate reality. It's a reflection of the sun, and there's only one sun. But we don't have to say that everything is a dream or dreamlike, according to that type of analogy. So this really is Sri Ramakrishna's position mostly, and this is the position of the Shaktas, the mother worshippers. They see everything as a manifestation of the divine, but also the one self dwelling within all beings. So the jiva at first remains in a state of ignorance. He is not conscious of God, but of the multiplicity. He sees many things around him. When attaining knowledge, he becomes conscious that God dwells in all beings. Now, does God dwell in all things as well? Yeah, okay. How?
God has become everything.
Has become everything. Okay, that's one thing. But if we're saying God dwells within all beings, then there'll be a question of manifestation. So we can say that the light of the sun falls on everything, but it's not reflected in everything. It has to have something shiny. It's reflected differently in a mirror, differently in water, differently in an oil slick, all different ways. And in the blacktop parking lot, not at all, not reflected at all. Now, if we say that Brahman is all pervading, and we say that just as gold pervades all golden ornaments, then of course there's nothing that doesn't have a drop in it that's not divine from that point of view. But when we're talking about the manifestation of God within all beings, it'll be greater in some than in others. Yeah. Or at least it'll be more available to us. We may say it's the same in all, but the covering is different, not allowing that light to shine through. So Sri Ramakrishna will talk about this when he gets to this, another lila, and he always says God dwells within every home, but the master of the home is generally found in the drawing room, by Tokkana. You want to find him there, search there. That's the devotee, the heart of the devotee. So he'll make those types of distinctions. Yeah, definitely dwelling within all beings, but manifest more or more easily seen in others. Suppose a man has a thorn in the sole of his foot. He gets another thorn and takes out the first one. In other words, he removes the thorn of ajnana, ignorance, by the thorn of jnana, knowledge. So this is uh, a teaching that really is utilized along the path of devotion. And the path of knowledge, it's difficult because at the very beginning we have to rely only on the highest truth. We have to, at the very beginning, say that this ego has no reality to it. The devotee has the luxury of utilizing the ego. I have this feeling of I, let me form a relationship with God. It becomes helpful. That's also this vidyamaya. It becomes helpful, and gradually that ego will change and become thinner and finer and everything, and will ultimately merge. The jnani has to do it from the very beginning. That either I am one with the Brahman, or this ego has no real substance to it. Start out with that. So this is on the path of devotion, or almost any path other than this restricted Dvaita Vedanta. We make use of this relative universe. This is that using this lila to reach the nitya. We utilize all of these relative terms, and even this ego sense, in order to remove. We use this. There's a good ego to remove the bad ego, higher mind to remove the mistakes in the lower mind, something like that. So this removing the thorn of ajnana, ignorance, by means of the thorn of knowledge, of jnana, knowledge. This is the way we get to the roof. Now, we know that Thakur always talks about a state beyond jnana. Jnana is that highest type of realization of oneness that leaves us merged in oneness, attaining to the roof, and not going beyond that stage of neti, or making a distinction between the real self and the non-real self, and that which is vastu and avastu, all of those types of distinctions. Coming back down, the vijnani, he says, transcends even those types of distinctions and sees only God everywhere, sees the divine everywhere. And it says, but on attaining vijnana, he discards both thorns, knowledge and ignorance. So it's a state beyond even knowledge. Knowledge implies some distinction between the real and the unreal. This vijnana state, everything is real, everything is divine. Now, the other curious thing about this vijnana state for the bhakta is that one has a relationship with his personal God. This is something that we understand as true only because of Sri Ramakrishna and other mystics like that. Or if we're very lucky, we have it ourselves. But when he says that he talks intimately with God day and night, it is no mere vision of God. So this means that in the very highest state, the realization of God is both personal and impersonal. And the personal God is also real. That means Nitya and Leela are both real. This is a very special teaching of Sri Ramakrishna, the state of vijnana. And that personal relationship is there. Will it be that way for everyone? No, not necessarily, because the jnanis can also become vijnanis, and then they'll be merged in Brahman, or they'll see everything dreamlike. They'll have their own type of way of living in the world as a God-realized soul. Thakur talks about all the different ways as a madman, as a child, and different ways for the God-realized soul to live in the world. But for the bhakta, they'll have that type of relationship. And is it absolute? Or is it conditioned? Now, for Sri Ramakrishna, everything was communing with the Divine Mother, seeing God as the Divine Mother. Is this 100% objective, or is it a little bit subjective? Somebody else, it'll be a whole different type of thing. It may be day and night, this communing with Krishna or something. Huh? So probably depends on the nature of the mind to some extent. It doesn't make it unreal or anything. But coming back into this world, everything is conditioned again with the mind. It's a transformed mind, but still it has its own samskaras and ways of looking at things. He who has merely heard of milk is ignorant. He who has seen milk has knowledge. But he who has drunk milk and become strengthened by it has attained vijnana. Yeah, the book can be written about Thakur's Vijnanavada, this state beyond realization. Because we only know, we have lots of things, books about Jivan Mukti Viveka, different things about what is the state of the God-realized soul. But Sri Ramakrishna, speaking from his own experience, he goes beyond what we ordinarily know and read and understand about that state, and explains it so many different ways. He talks about this state of the vijnani, someone who's gone beyond all of that. So, personal experience, he says, described his own state of mind to the devil. He was indeed. Now, of course, a vijnani can be any ordinary person, doesn't mean an avatar or anything like that. Anybody can be a vijnani, in theory. In theory. Anybody who can have that highest type of realization and come back down from that, short of getting merged in nirvikalpa samadhi, is a vijnani. Those who came to earth with some special mission, avatars, Ishvara Kotis and everything, are practically born in that state of vijnana. They still have some maya, some cobwebs to clear off, but they won't be born as a perfect soul, nitya siddha, unless they were vijnanis before, unless they had the highest realization and came back down from it. Otherwise, they'll be gone. They'll merge in Brahman and never to come back again. That soul is done. Work is done. Yeah.
In Sri Ramakrishna's life, whenever he was not in samadhi, would we say that he saw God dwelling within everyone very clearly, or God has become everything?
Okay, this is the question. What was Thakur's vision after coming back down from samadhi and as a vijnani? Huh? Did he see everything as a manifestation of the divine, or did he see God dwelling with it? Both. And in different stages and phases, he went through all different periods with different spiritual attitudes. This whole section really is about this shift. We're having a little bit of a paradigm shift, and Sri Ramakrishna now is coming to this point where he wants to see God dwelling within all living beings, not a lila. This is that broken arm transitional point where now I want to see God dwelling within all beings, but that doesn't change the fact that he sees everything as chinmaya, as a manifestation of the divine, of consciousness. So both the outer covering is a manifestation of the divine, and the reflected light of God within the heart of each and every living being is also the divine presence. So he would see both. At least he would at different times he would just express it differently. Sometimes I see the God alone dwelling within all beings. Then other times, sometimes I see everything is nothing but consciousness, like seeing wax fruit. Looks like it's apple, pear, grapes, and different, but I see it all as one substance. So both, I would say both. Did he not see variety? He also saw variety. He saw individuals. He could talk to them and do everything. Somehow, his mind could see all of these things and experience it as some type of unity, without having to jump from one to the other. And yeah, master to the devotees. There's a difference between a sadhu endowed with jnana and one endowed with vijnana. The jnani sadhu has a certain way of sitting. Now, now, is he talking about a God-realized soul or just someone who fashions himself as a jnani? This will be more a sadhu who says, "Yeah, I don't care for these gods and goddesses, and I am he. That's my attitude." The jnani sadhu has a certain way of sitting. He twirls his mustache and asks the visitor, "Well, sir, have you any question to ask?" But the man who always sees God and talks to him intimately has an altogether different nature. He is sometimes like an inert thing, sometimes like a ghoul, sometimes like a child, and sometimes like a madman. There's a verse in the Vivek Chudamani and another verse in the Bhagavad Purana with these same four things. I don't know which one came first or who took one from the other or anything, but uh, Thakur was very fond of this idea that Jadavat, that like inert thing, and Thakur went through all of these, had all of these experiences. He used to talk about he would have such deep meditation that animals would crawl over his body, birds would land on his head, they would start picking little food bits from his long hair and everything like that, as if he were just an inert thing. So Yadavat. And then Pishachavat. Pishachavat. This, like a ghoul, that not making any distinction between pure and impure, anything like that. Now, this is the one attitude that wasn't uh, part of the personality of Sri Ramakrishna. Now, he went through that phase and he had to do that type of spiritual practice. And he did so many different things to convince him that there's no distinction between pure and impure, that sometimes he would eat off of the leaf plates of the beggars who used to take food at Dakshineswar. And when he did it, tantric sadhana, he had to do all sorts of things. He to put different objects, feces and things of jackals on the tongue, and just to convince the mind that this likes and dislikes are all within the mind. That this is nothing but one physical object composed of the gunas resting on another physical object composed of the gunas, and it's only in the mind that we have this idea that something is despicable and awful and everything, to get beyond that idea. So there's some who remain like that. Thakur didn't remain like that. That for most of his life after, he was very sensitive to anything impure. We know that. That was just his nature. It didn't have to be that way. He also had his own personality, his own human mind that had its own distinctive features. So sometimes like a ghoul, some like a child. Now this one we can say was very typical of Sri Ramakrishna. And why so typical? Partly because his spiritual attitude was to worship God as mother and to think of himself as a child. So that was very, very natural to him. And sometimes like a madman. And this was the state that Sri Ramakrishna went through at a certain period, that state of divine madness that lasted for a long time. By the time the devotees came, that type of madness had passed. They didn't see him that way a little bit, although Swamiji thought he was a little bit mad when he first met him, but not like before, when really he would just go about crying, weeping and crying, mother, mother, mother. They couldn't hold a decent conversation, couldn't sleep at night, couldn't eat, and really just like some type of madness. Now he'll explain a little bit these different states. When he is in samadhi, he becomes unconscious of the outer world and appears inert, jadavat. He sees everything to be full of Brahman consciousness. Therefore, he behaves like a ghoul. So this is pishachavat. So how do we distinguish between something pure and impure when everything is equally a manifestation of the divine? only because of our samskaras and our ideas within our mind. Of course, we can say there's some objectivity to it. That some things are actually dirty. That if you eat it, you'll get sick and everything. But still, if we analyze everything as a play of the gunas, or everything is chinmaya, however we look upon it, that it's mostly our own mind. So, if we see everything as Brahman consciousness, then we won't make the same types of distinctions, the same play of divinity everywhere. He is not conscious of the holy and the unholy, Pishachavat. He does not observe any formal purity. This is all about this ghoul-like nature. To him, everything is Brahman. He is not aware of filth as such. Even rice and other cooked food, after a few days, becomes like filth. This is a type of filth here. It means feces. It means it gets converted, in a fecal matter. It looks so nice, a sandesh, all these very wonderful things. They all come out the same, the other side. So we make all of these big distinctions. So this is one type of spiritual practice and spiritual attitude. We had the Purnagyani that we read about, and Thakur talks about another one who came wearing one tattered shoe and having a mango plant and everything, and then this idea: when do we have perfect knowledge? When there's no difference we see no difference between the water of the Ganga and the water in the sewer ditch, that filter water, and then we attain the highest type of knowledge. Others will say, what type of knowledge is that? We should be sensible people and be able to distinguish this and that. This is according to that type of personality. We can say 4 personality types of God realized. So this is Pishachavat. Again, he is like a madman with Madhavat. People notice his ways and actions and think of him as insane. This was the general impression that people had of Sri Ramakrishna. He's a good man, but he's lost his head a little bit. This is our wonderful Shivanath, that Thakur loves so much from the Brahmo Samaj. Yeah, that was his theory. That by thinking so much, all the spiritual practice and everything, he's going a little bit crazy. He's a good man, nice man, holy man, but a little bit crazy. Behead hoyat. Where sometimes he is like a child, no bondage, no shame, no hatred, no hesitation, or the like. Yeah, Sri Ramakrishna, he had no body consciousness. He had no normally, if our cloth falls off and we're exposed, ourselves will be very embarrassed, cover ourselves up and everything. He didn't have anything, just like a child. It's nice in India. You see these little kids running around. What are they wearing? Sometimes you'll see one red string tied around the waist. I never quite understood that, but that's the only thing they're wearing. And they're not aware of anything. Yeah, perfect innocence. Yeah. What's the deal with that one red string? You've seen it like that, huh? Yeah. To ward off the evil eye, something like that. Okay. But otherwise, nothing, not a stitch of clothing. It's a certain age and a hot season, of course. One reaches the state of mind after having the vision of God. When a boat passes by a magnetic hill, its screws and nails become loose and drop out. Lust, anger, and the other passions cannot exist after the vision of God. Now, what this is saying is that there'll be some gradual continuum, will become purer and purer, sense of I will change, everything kind of gradual, but something will happen that'll be very radical. This God realization, a very radical thing, that when we read all of our karma is burned up, it means some real fire takes place. So Thakur is comparing that to lightning striking a building. So all of those things which represent bondage, the shame, anger, fear, lust, greed, all of these things, they get completely changed, converted, or eliminated, or removed. This really is what it means to live in the world as a free soul, So it's a very radical type of thing that takes place. Once a thunderbolt struck the Kali temple. I noticed that it flattened the points of the screws. It is no longer possible for the man who has seen God to beget children and perpetuate the creation. When the grain of paddy is sown, it grows into a plant, but a grain of boiled paddy does not germinate. Yeah, the God realized soul has no real connection with the body anymore. And all desires are completely eliminated, only that longing to commune with God. He who has seen God retains his I only in name. So there's no binding power to the ego, but there is an ego. Everybody has an ego. The only time we don't is when we're sleeping, or when we're very much engrossed in reading a book or something like that. We become a little forgetful. We're watching a movie and we forget that we're sitting in the theater and everything. A little bit, but it's a temporary thing. God realized soul loses that ego completely in that state of absorption. Coming back down, the ego comes back, but it's completely transformed. There's no binding power whatsoever to that type of ego. But Sri Ramakrishna, did he not recognize himself as an individual, a child of the Divine Mother? Yeah, because you can't live in the world without an ego. This is the ego. The vijnani has that ego of devotion or the ego of knowledge, but it's an ego. Only has no binding power. So he who has seen God retains his I only in name. That means that there's no real substance to it. Of course, with us, there's no real substance, but we think it's something real. No evil can be done by that I. So we read that God realized soul can do anything and there'll be no karma attached to it. Can kill somebody. But they say, oh, I'm not the doer. But what's the motive? What will cause them? There'll be no unless it's this very odd case of dharma and everything. That it has to be done for the sake of the welfare of humanity. There'll be no motive power to do anything that will be harmful to anybody. So it's just in theory. If one did something evil, no karma would come to him, but that would be proof that he's not a God-realized soul. So it's really kind of a moot point whether God-realized soul can perform any type of evil and get away with it without getting any karmic result. Theoretically, yes, anything done without this feeling of I, but why? There would be no motive, no reason to do anything, and so that'll be a test. When the God realized soul, they won't do anything that's not beneficial to others. They say like the rain that comes down in the springtime, that'll water everything and all the plants will come. This is how the God realized soul lives in the world. No evil can be done by that I. It is a mere appearance, like the mark left on the coconut tree by its branch. Sometimes he says this akarmaturu. It looks like in the ego. Sometimes he says with us, it's like a rope on the surface of the water. Where other people like for this God realized, so it's like a line drawn on the surface of the water. What does that mean? It can't leave any mark on it. It is a mere appearance, like the mark left on the coconut tree by the branch. The branch has fallen off, only the mark remains. I said to Keshav Sen, give up the ego that makes you feel, I am the doer, I am teaching people. This will be that unripe ego. Keshav said to me, sir, then I cannot keep the organization. Keshav, he was very intelligent and very honest also. Other people wouldn't want to admit that. It sounds egotistical, but he was also a little bit guileless. I get that impression with Keshav. That he didn't hesitate to tell Sri Ramakrishna that how will I keep this organization together? He'll know that will sound odd to Sri Ramakrishna. The goal of life is God realization. What do you care about all this other stuff? But he doesn't mind. He had that type of relationship with Thakur. So Keshav said to me, "Sir, then I cannot keep the organization." Thereupon I said to him, "Give up the wicked ego." Yeah, Bodhjadam. Yeah. So because Thakur's idea was it's impossible to give up the ego completely. He said, let that rascal remain as a servant if you can't get rid of it. But give up this other rascal type of ego. One doesn't have to renounce the ego that makes one feel, I am the servant of God, I am his devotee. In fact, one needs that type of ego. That's what counteracts the other type of ego. That's the good thorn that takes out the bad thorn. One doesn't develop the divine ego as long as one retains the wicked ego. So we have to break this identification with all of our likes and dislikes, all of our opinions, all of the false identifications, desires. We have to break all of that if we want to have any chance of having this divine type of ego. If a man is in charge of the storeroom, the master of the house doesn't feel responsible for it. So we won't reach that point where we can feel God alone is the doer, as long as I feel, no, I'm the doer. That has to go first. To the devotees. Now we'll get this whole change in Thakur's attitude. You see, my nature is changing on account of this injury to my arm. He makes this statement, I don't know how many times, a dozen times. He really felt that Divine Mother had a plan for him, that don't think breaking your arm has no deep significance, that this was really a turning point in his spiritual attitude towards things. You see, my nature is changing on account of this injury to my arm. It is being revealed to me that there is a greater manifestation of God in man than in other created beings. God is telling me, as it were, I dwell in men, and I dwell in people. Be merry with men. Among men, God manifests himself in a still greater degree in pure soul devotees. So this is what I was saying, that the sun is shining everywhere, but it'll be reflected better in some. In a pure heart, it will be reflected better. That is why I feel great longing for Narendra, Rakal, and other such youngsters. So we have kind of three levels. One, seeing God dwelling within all beings. Then two, seeing special manifestation of God in the pure souls and in the devotees. And three, avatar. That'll be the other Nara Lila, to see that the very special manifestation of God in these rare souls that come every few hundred years and have some special divine mission and founders of new religious traditions and everything. One often sees, and all of them are Nara Lila. He uses that term for all of them. There's a worship of, and now Swamiji took this idea, and for Swamiji, this was the highest worship, to worship God dwelling within all beings, higher than any other type of worship. You break all other idols. This is the living God. That beautiful poem of his, The Living God. One often sees small holes along the edge of a lake. Fish and crabs accumulate there. Just so, there's a greater accumulation of divinity in man. It is said that man is greater than the shalagram. The shalagram is just a stone image. It's something that's naturally found, and it'll have certain marks on it. A little flat and have a little some indentation or something like that. We know about Thakur's father when he was going on some trip and he felt drowsy and he had this little kind of dream that there's a shalagram and he found it and there was, I think, a snake covering it or something. Anybody remember the whole story? And then so we took it and took it back and they worshipped it. Shibu.
That was Raghuveer.
Yeah, that's the Raghuvir. The Shalagram is a symbol of Vishnu. So that's in Thakur's family, they didn't have any image of anything. Everything was a symbolic thing. There's the worship of Rama. There was no picture or anything. And the worship of Shiva. So they had a Shiva lingam for Shiva, a Shalagram for Vishnu, or Raghuvir Rama, and then Shitala was just a jar with water. We can say Divine Mother that way. So this is one non-anthropomorphic way that worship was done in India and for many ancient traditions. Yeah, in fact, worship of Shiva is generally done. Not too many places where you'll see a picture or image of Shiva. Generally, the Shiva lingam. So the Shalagram for the Vaishnavas is something very important. So it said the man is greater than the Shalagram. So the Shalagram is something that really is put right on the shrine and worshipped. Yeah, so that means there's a higher form of worship to see God dwelling in human beings than in any other type of symbolic type of worship. Man is Narayana himself. If God can manifest himself through an image, then why not through man also? God is born as man for the purpose of sporting as man. Now we'll get to this other Nara-lila avatar. Rama, Krishna, and Chaitanya are examples. By meditating on an incarnation of God, one meditates on God himself. Now, this is a wonderful thing. This is a really a great blessing for us if we have faith in this statement. Because if we're told to meditate on God, we say, how do I do it? What does it mean? What picture is there in my mind? You want me to think of one of the deities I can worship? Think of Shiva and Durga and all of that. I can do that to a certain extent, but you want me to just meditate on God, as consciousness or as the divine power, formless, something like that. How do I do it? And we're told here that there's a special manifestation of God in human form, and these great souls, the Rama, Krishna, the avatars, meditating on them is the same, equal. The same result will be there. That the object of our meditation is that same divinity. Only it'll be something that we can have a relationship with, that we can picture, and without just using our imagination. So it's a great advantage for those who like this idea of this human form of God, this avatar idea. Swami Swananji used to say, the avatar is as good as God. It's a very interesting statement. As good as God. So for meditation purposes, for worship purposes, to meditate on the avatar, to worship the avatar, can be our way of worshiping and meditating on God when we have no real clear conception. Because everything is our conception. When Thakur talks about this Nara-lila, he talks about Deva-lila. We can meditate on this divine play of Shiva, going into the cremation ground, meditating and burning up going to the dakshas, yagna, all the different things. That's also a type of lila. Now the other is something that took place on earth. Let's assume Chaitanya Deva and everything. There's another type of not a lila, but from the point of view of meditation, they're both conceptions of the mind. There's no real difference. If somebody says, I meditate on Rama, someone says, I meditate on Shiva. And somebody says, well, they're two completely different things. One is a human manifestation. The other is some. From that point of view, you can make a distinction. One is Deva Lila and the other is Nara Lila. But otherwise, what am I doing? I'm projecting an image. I'm trying to imagine this divinity in this image, and I'm doing it because I want to commune with the real divinity within the heart. So there's no real distinction that way. And same thing with this avatar. And what is our conception of God? Swamiji says, you take your conception of God, you'll find that it's far below the reality of the avatar. You try to think of God as loving, all loving. It's limited by your ability to love. Compassion, limited by your ability to be compassionate. You look at Holy Mother. Can you conceive of even of a God who has that type of love and compassion and fellow feeling for all beings? We can't. So he says it's even higher. Why even try to imagine these divine qualities when they're present there in a form that's greater than our imagination can imagine? It's a very interesting concept, Swamiji says. This is the advantage of the avatar. And of course, with Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, they're so close to us. And we know so much about them and everything. So by meditating on an incarnation of God, one meditates on God himself. Bhagavan Das, a Brahmo devotee, arrived. Master, to Bhagavan Das, the eternal religion, the religion of the rishis, has been in existence from time out of mind and will exist eternally. There exists in this Sanatana Dharma all forms of worship, worship of God with form, and worship of the impersonal deity as well. It contains all paths, the path of knowledge, the path of devotion, and so on. This is really, Thakur is giving just a summary of his whole spiritual outlook and teachings of Vedanta. It contains all paths, the path of knowledge, the path of devotion, and so on. Other forms of religion, the modern cults, will remain for a few days and then disappear. So that is the end of that day. We'll continue next time with March 23rd, 1884. Om Niranjanam Nityamanantarupam Bhaktanukham Bhatudvikraham Ishavataram Parameshamidhyam Tam Ramakrishnam Shirasa Namama. We bow our heads before Sri Ramakrishna, who is stainless, of infinite nature, whose heart melts in sympathy for his devotees, who is an embodiment of the divine and the Supreme Lord, and ever worthy of our worship. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto